Notification came in at 6:52 on a Tuesday morning and I almost dismissed it without looking. I was sitting in the passenger seat of a rideshare somewhere on the I-90 corridor outside of Chicago, laptop open on my knees, a half-finished oat milk latte going cold in the colder beside me. I had a deposition prep call starting in 40 minutes with a client I'd been working with for 7 months. A mid-sized pharmaceutical distributor that had hired my firm to audit their third-party logistics contracts after a compliance gap had nearly cost them their DEA registration. My phone buzzed face down on the seat. The sender was my brother. The subject line said, "Don't freak out. But we made a decision." I opened it because I assumed he meant the decision about Thanksgiving. He and his wife had been going back and forth for 3 weeks about whether they were driving to our aunt's place in Columbus or staying in Cincinnati. I was not particularly invested either way. I clicked it because I thought it would take 10 seconds to read and I could move on. It took longer than 10 seconds. The email was 4 paragraphs. My brother, I'll call him my brother because that's what he was legally and technically for 31 years, wrote that he and his wife had spoken with a financial advisor and determined that the arrangement we had wasn't working for them anymore. He wrote that the money I had transferred into the joint account we used for the property we co-owned was being redirected. He wrote that they had already spoken with a realtor. He wrote in the final paragraph that he hoped I understood this was a business decision and not personal and that family was still family at the end of the day. I read it twice. Then I set my phone face down again. Outside, the highway was gray and flat. The driver had talk radio on at low volume. I had 22 minutes until my call. I did not feel panicked. I felt the particular stillness that arrives when something lands exactly where you expected it, in the place you had been quietly watching for 18 months. My name is Claire Denton. I'm 32 years old. For the past 6 years, I've worked as a contract compliance analyst, which means companies pay me to sit inside their vendor agreements and find the places where language does the work of intention, where a clause that sounds protective is actually a liability, where a definition buried on page 14 changes the entire meaning of page 2. I am, by training and by nature, a person who reads things carefully. I keep records the way most people keep photo albums. I notice when something is off in the same way a musician notices a wrong note. Not dramatically, just immediately and with complete certainty. My brother had not accounted for that. Let me go back. Our father passed away 3 years before the events I'm describing. Pancreatic cancer, which is the kind that doesn't negotiate. He was 61. He left behind a house in Dayton that needed significant work, a modest life insurance policy, and a family that had never quite figured out how to talk about money without someone leaving the room. My brother is 4 years older than me. Growing up, he was the one people described as the fun one, the charmer, the guy who could talk his way into anything and had a laugh that made strangers feel like old friends. Those qualities read differently depending on where you're standing. When you're 8 and he's 12, it's just your big brother being magnetic. When you're 28 and watching him ask your widowed father for a loan he will describe as temporary and never reference again. The word that comes to mind is different. After our father died, my brother and his wife hit a rough stretch. He'd left a sales management job under circumstances he summarized as creative differences and was doing contract work that paid irregularly. His wife worked part-time at a dental office. They had 2 kids, a mortgage they'd stretched to afford, and a lifestyle that had been built around an income that no longer existed. I had bought a condo in Chicago at 29 with a down payment I'd saved over 4 years of working 60-hour weeks. I also owned, jointly with my brother, a small rental property in Dayton that we'd inherited from our father, a 3-bedroom house on a quiet street that a property management company ran for us. The rental income split evenly. My brother's half covered roughly 2 of his 4 monthly mortgage payments. About a year before the email, my brother called and said he had a proposal. He wanted to buy out my share of the Dayton property, use his half as collateral to refinance, and get a larger cut of the rental income. He framed it as an investment opportunity for both of us. I would get a lump sum. He would build equity. He said it with the smooth confidence of someone who had already decided the answer was yes and was treating the conversation as a formality. I said I needed to think about it. I did think about it for about 48 hours. Then I called my attorney. Her name is Sylvia Ostroff. She's been a real estate and estate law attorney in Chicago for 20 years, and she has the specific quality of person who can deliver bad news without drama and good news, without excitement. Everything lands at the same steady temperature, which is exactly what you want when you're trying to think clearly. I explained the situation. I told her about the proposal, about my brother's financial instability, about the pattern I had been watching for years. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "What does the co-ownership agreement currently say about sale or transfer?" I pulled up the document that night. We had a co-ownership agreement drafted when we inherited the property. Standard language, prepared by a general practice attorney in Dayton who had done it as a favor to our father's estate. It was not a terrible document. It was, however, a document written for two people who trusted each other completely and had no reason to anticipate conflict. My brother had signed it. So had I. It contained a right of first refusal clause, a dispute resolution provision, and, critically, a shared account structure for the rental income that listed both of our names on the operating account. That last part mattered. Over the next 6 weeks, while my brother was waiting for my answer on his buyout proposal, I quietly restructured everything I could restructure. Sylvia drafted an amendment to our co-ownership agreement that clarified the terms under which either party could initiate a sale, language that would protect my interest if he moved unilaterally. She also flagged something the original document had left ambiguous. The shared operating account had broad enough access language that either party could, technically, move funds without the other's explicit authorization per transaction. I closed my personal savings account that was linked to the operating account's routing history. I opened a new one at a different institution entirely. I moved every dollar I had in accessible holdings, methodically, in amounts that wouldn't trigger flags, over the course of 3 weeks. What remained in my share of the operating account was exactly what needed to be there to cover my half of legitimate property expenses for the next quarter. Enough to look normal. Not enough to constitute a meaningful target. I also hired a forensic accountant named Dana Wells. Dana spent 12 years doing financial investigations for a regional bank before going independent. She reviewed the operating account's transaction history and found what I had already suspected but needed documented over the previous 14 months. My brother had made 11 withdrawals from the operating account that exceeded his authorized share of that quarter's rental distributions. Small amounts, irregular intervals, totaling just over $9,000, each one with a description that referenced property maintenance or emergency repair, categories that were vague enough to explain away individually but, laid side by side, told a clear story. Dana put it in a report, 21 pages. Every transaction, every timestamp, every discrepancy between the listed expense category and the property management company's actual maintenance records, which I had requested directly and kept in a separate folder on a cloud server my brother had no access to. I did not confront him. I said I was still thinking about the buyout. He called twice to follow up. Both times I said the same thing. I want to make sure the terms are right for both of us. I'm working through some details. I appreciate your patience. He sounded slightly frustrated the second time. Not suspicious, frustrated. The difference matters. In September, about 4 months after his initial proposal, I had a conversation with the property management company. The manager, a methodical man named Greg, had been overseeing the Dayton property for 5 years. I explained, carefully, that I was reviewing our co-ownership structure for estate planning purposes, and that I wanted to make sure all future rental disbursements were individually coded by ownership share. This was presented as an administrative update. Greg found it completely unremarkable. He made the change in about 10 minutes. What that meant, in practice, was that any future attempt to withdraw rental income from the operating account without my authorization would immediately generate an individualized record tied to one party's share. The paper trail was now automatic. In October, I asked Sylvia to file a quiet title action on my behalf, a formal legal mechanism to clarify the ownership record of the Dayton property and create a court-visible documentation of my interest. It's not a dramatic move. It doesn't make the news. It just means that if someone tries to transfer or encumber your share of a jointly owned property without your knowledge, There is a public record that will make that extremely complicated. My brother did not know about any of this. I flew to Chicago for Thanksgiving instead of going to Columbus. I told my family I had a client deadline. I sat in my apartment with a glass of wine and a finished brief and felt something close to calm. The business trip to Seattle was scheduled in December. I told my brother 3 weeks in advance, not because I needed to, but because I wanted to see his reaction. We were on a call about something else, a question about the property tax filing, and I mentioned it casually. I'll be out of town the first 2 weeks of December, big client engagement, I'll be mostly unreachable. He said that's fine, hope it goes well. His voice was smooth, slightly too smooth in the way that voices get when someone is filing information away rather than processing it socially. I left on a Monday. On Tuesday evening, Seattle time, I got an alert from Dana. She had set up a monitoring flag on the operating account, a professional courtesy, she called it, and the flag had triggered. An attempted transfer of $47,000 had been initiated from the operating account. The transfer was to an account I didn't recognize. It had processed into a review queue that Dana and Sylvia had established with the bank 6 weeks earlier, specifically for this scenario. The funds were frozen pending dual authorization. At 6:52 Wednesday morning, my brother sent the email. The email in which he explained that he and his wife had made a business decision, in which he mentioned the realtor, in which he said he hoped I understood. What he didn't mention was the frozen transfer. What he didn't mention was that the realtor he had called, a woman whose name appeared in the property management correspondence I had access to, had already contacted Greg that morning to request showing availability for the Dayton property, a property she had been told was about to become solely my brother's to sell. I sat in the rideshare and read the email a third time. Then I forwarded it to Sylvia with 3 words, "It's starting, go." I made my deposition prep call. I was precise and focused, and I did not think about my brother once for the next 90 minutes. By the time I landed back in Chicago 2 days later, Sylvia had filed for an emergency injunction blocking any sale or transfer of the Dayton property pending resolution of a financial dispute between co-owners. The bank had formally frozen the operating account and flagged the attempted transfer for review under its internal fraud protocols. Dana's 21-page report had been submitted as supporting documentation. My brother called that afternoon. He had been trying to reach me since Wednesday. I let the first 2 calls go. On the third, I answered. He didn't say hello. He launched in immediately. His voice had the tense, slightly airless quality of someone who has been rehearsing a conversation and is now finding that the script isn't landing correctly. He said there had been a misunderstanding with the account. He said the realtor situation was exploratory. He said I had overreacted. I said, to which part? He went quiet for a second. Then he said the transfer was for property expenses. I was going to tell you. I said, $47,000 of property expenses processed to an account not listed anywhere in our co-ownership agreement, while I was out of state without prior notice. He said, "You're twisting this." I said, "I'm not twisting anything. I'm describing what happened." Dana Wells described what happened. 21 pages describe what happened. There was a longer silence. He said, "Who is Dana Wells?" I said, "She's the person who spent 8 weeks documenting 11 unauthorized withdrawals from the operating account over the past 14 months. Would you like me to send you the report?" He didn't answer that. He said I was making this into something it wasn't. He said we were family. He said our father would have been upset by this. That last one I had been waiting for. People who have been caught reach for the things they think will make you feel guilty enough to stop. Our father is the largest thing my brother owns that actually belongs to both of us, and he knew it. I said, "Dad left us that property equally. I've been managing my half responsibly. I'd like to continue doing that." Then I said I had a call to get to, which was true, and I ended the conversation. His wife texted me that evening. The message was long, 2 paragraphs about how stress had been affecting my brother, about the kids, about how family doesn't do this to each other. It was not unkind in tone. It was also not an acknowledgement of what had happened. I read it once and didn't respond. What followed was not a dramatic confrontation. Real legal processes are not dramatic. They are document requests and schedule calls and phrases like pending resolution and per the terms of the agreement. They are a mediator on a Zoom call who speaks at the same measured pace regardless of what either party says. They are waiting. Considerable waiting. The mediation took 3 months. My brother's attorney, a general practice lawyer in Cincinnati who was clearly more comfortable with contract disputes than real property fraud, negotiated an agreement that I found acceptable. The terms were structured repayment of the $9,000 in unauthorized withdrawals with documentation, a formal buyout of his share of the Dayton property at fair market value, which, given current comparable sales in that area, was higher than he had originally proposed paying me for my share. A provision that the attempted $47,000 transfer be formally recorded in the case file as unauthorized. The criminal referral question, whether the bank's fraud flag would generate a formal investigation, was something I did not control. Dana told me that given the amounts in the documentation, it was possible. I said I understood. I did not advocate for or against it. That is a distinction I want to be clear about. I did not go looking for a way to send my brother to prison. I documented what happened, reported what was reportable, and let the systems I had built do exactly what systems built for that purpose are supposed to do. The bank's fraud review is, as far as I know, still ongoing. I sold the Dayton property 6 weeks after the mediation closed. A family bought it, 2 teachers and a 9-year-old, according to the realtor, who seemed to find that detail meaningful and told me twice. I used my share of the proceeds to pay off the remaining balance on my condo. I repainted my 2nd bedroom in January. I'd wanted to do it for 2 years and kept putting it off. I chose a color called quiet green, which is exactly what it sounds like. I assembled a new bookshelf on a Saturday morning with no one's help and no one's commentary and put every book I own on it in an order that made sense to me. The room is also now my home office. Better desk, better chair, better light. I run 3 client engagements out of that space, and on quiet mornings when the city hasn't woken up yet, I sit there with coffee and I think that the square footage of a room feels different when you've cleared out everything that was making it smaller. My brother and I have not spoken since the mediation. His wife sent a Christmas card. I received it. My aunt called me in February, and I knew before she said anything that my brother had already talked to her. She is a careful woman, my aunt, and she has known us our whole lives. She said she just wanted to check in. I said I was well. She said she hoped things might improve between us someday. I said I hoped so too, and I meant it in the specific way you can mean something that you don't particularly expect to happen. I am not angry. I want to be precise about that, because I think people expect anger in a story like this, and I understand why. It's a tidy emotion. It explains the actions. It gives the story a clear villain and a clear victim. But anger was not what I felt at 6:52 on a Tuesday morning in the back of a rideshare on the I-90. What I felt was the particular quietness of something ending that you had already, privately, accepted was going to end. The grief of it is real. My brother was also my father's son, and my father loved us both. And the version of my family in which that is all there is a version I genuinely mourn. But grief and accountability are not opposites. You can miss someone and still require them to answer for what they did. There is one thing I want to say directly to you before I close. If you have a person in your life, a sibling, a parent, a spouse, a friend with whom you share finances, who has been making small moves you keep explaining away, the open mail that wasn't quite opened, the question about your banking that felt slightly too specific, the expense that didn't quite add up but wasn't large enough to make a scene about, I want you to hear this. Document it. Not to be paranoid, not to go looking for a fight. Document it the way you would document anything that matters to you because it does matter and because the person making those small moves is counting on you not to. They are counting on your love being larger than your attention to detail. Mine was not. That is not a tragic ending. That is the only part of this I am entirely proud of. I've thought a lot about why my brother believed it would work. Not the mechanics of it, the account access, the realtor call, the email timed to land while I was out of state. Those parts I understood the moment I read them. What I've thought about is the assumption underneath all of it, the thing he had to believe. in order to feel confident moving forward. He had to believe that I loved him more than I paid attention. That's not an insult, that's just the math of it. People who take from the people closest to them are almost never operating on hatred. They're operating on a specific, practiced form of confidence. The confidence that comes from years of watching someone absorb things quietly and move on. My brother had watched me do that our whole lives. He watched me not make a scene when he borrowed money from our father and never mentioned it again. He watched me manage the Dayton property for 3 years without complaint, handle the paperwork, field the calls from the property management company. He watched me be capable and reliable and low drama, and somewhere in that watching, he decided that capable and reliable and low drama meant I wouldn't act. He was wrong, and the wrongness cost him. That's not a cruel thing to say. It's just accurate. What you choose to do and what you choose not to do has weight. It accumulates. My brother made 11 unauthorized withdrawals over 14 months. Each one small enough to feel like a rounding error. Each one a choice. Those choices built the report Dana put together. Those choices are why the bank flagged the transfer. Those choices are why there is a formal case record with his name on it. He authored every page of that outcome himself, one small decision at a time. And I think on some level he knew that the morning he called and I said Dana Wells is the person who documented 11 unauthorized withdrawals, and there was nothing left to say. Here is what I want you to take from this, because I don't think this story is really about money or property or even betrayal at its core. It's about what it costs to go through life assuming that the people who love you will absorb whatever you do to them. That assumption is comfortable. It's also a trap, not one that other people set for you, but one you build around yourself, brick by brick, every time you treat someone's patience as an unlimited resource. And on the other side of it, the cost of knowing what you're worth and being willing to defend it. Not loudly, not dramatically, methodically. Sylvia didn't raise her voice in that mediation. Dana's report didn't editorialize. I didn't yell at my brother on the phone. None of the things that protected me required anger. They required attention, documentation, and the willingness to follow through even when it was uncomfortable, even when the person on the other end of the case file shared my last name. Intelligence without the willingness to act on what you know is just information, and integrity without the spine to hold your own line is just a personality trait that other people learn to work around. I rebuilt my condo the way I wanted it after all of this. The second bedroom is an office now. There's better light and a shelf full of books and a desk I bought on my own terms. I sit there some mornings and think about my father, who loved us both and left us something equal, and I think that the most honest thing I can do for his memory is not let what he left be taken from me without a word. That is the only inheritance that matters to me now. Not the property, not the settlement. The fact that I knew what was mine and I kept it.